Hello and welcome to the Keystone Kickoff Show. I'm Jim Galante along with T. Frank Carr. T. Frank, my friend, how are we doing this week?
It's May. There's no this is the football wasteland time of year. So I spent a lot of time gardening, and that was nice. So that's T. Frank off-season mode. Doesn't know what to do with himself. Just kind of wanders around looking for things. So not bad.
And you stumbled into the garden.
Yeah.
Well, you are right. The month turned over. It's now May. Last week, I hadn't got a chance to talk to you about it. I did want to mention, finally, that day arrived that we were all expecting. You have 97 players on scholarship. You're going to end up having some attrition through the portal.
Yeah.
Other than King Mac, were there any losses there that you said, "Ooh, that one might come back to haunt them"?
Something that Nate Bauer is writing about at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com that I think is super important. And by the way, you can sign up and read all that stuff for $1. The receiver situation, you talked about it. I think you said it maybe a month or two ago that even if the 85 scholarship number doesn't really matter anymore because of NIL, you still have roster spots. You still have a depth chart. You still have playing time. And so that room has thinned out pretty quickly. And now you have you're wondering where, like, is this team deep enough to consistently field players that are capable of performing? Not necessarily like, can they find a guy to break out and be great, but like, the depth is really thin there right now. So you've got some players left. Trey Wallace is still, I think, a good bet to be a semi breakout player this year. But yeah, the receiver position, I think, is a very interesting one after Malik McClain left the program. And then, like, as you mentioned, King Mac making that decision is peak transfer portal, in my opinion.
What do you mean by peak transfer portal?
He's the team's fourth safety. So this is a guy who's going to play in 2024. He's going to be a part of the two deep. If you're a team that plays three safeties, your fourth safety is pretty damn important. So he's not going to start. Fine. But playing time is the currency of the day. And leaving a program in spring that is highly stable on the defensive side of the ball, in a defense that features safeties and what they can do and coverages and is creative and gets guys in position to get the football, all because you want to play now and you want those benefits of playing now, is completely sacrificing all of that all of those positive attributes. To me, the decision to move on for King Mac, I mean, if you're living in a black and white binary world of start, don't start, star, not a star, yeah, of course it makes sense. But that's not college football, and that's not this defense. They've shown that if you're good enough to play, and they can trust you at safety, you will play. Maybe you're not playing 600 snaps and you're not Tig Brown, but he's a sophomore. He's not a junior or a senior whose clock is run out. You put together strong film this year. In your role, you likely ascend to a different role, a starting role in 2025, and you're off to the NFL, because that's the reason from a football perspective you would transfer so that you can get tape this year. And I think that's a mistake, especially for like a safety or some positional player that the understanding of the architecture of the offense or defense is so important and so vital to playing well.
You make a good point also that they're going to play three safeties. So if you're the fourth safety, and the way this defense has been structured the last couple of years, I've always made the reference, they had a starting 20 players a year ago and 2 years ago.
Yeah.
You're going to play if you've got the skill level. And by all accounts, what we saw of him and everything we've heard of him, that's the one loss that hurts. By the way, this was not going to be our topic for today, T. Frank.
The thing, from a football perspective, it's mystifying. And I just want to expand on this last part
Sure.
with that particular situation, because it's not just to me, at least from sitting on this side as somebody who watches football players for a living. It's not just that you're out there. What are you doing when you're out there? Are you putting good tape out there? So, safety is not corner. It's not defensive end. Linebacker and safety are hard because you got to understand the nuances of what's coming at you. There's a reason Penn State takes safety prospects and starts them at corner to see, first off, if they can stick at a highly valuable position, and secondly, to ease them into college football, because it's a lot. Safety, you have to know the whole defense. So King Mac is leaving in May. You got 4 months, essentially, to pick a destination, pick a defense that fits, learn the defense, outcompete players who are there at that position. Presumably, you're going somewhere that's going to guarantee you a spot anyway. But what is the quality of the position you're going to and putting yourself in? Because if you go out and play but don't play well, that's not any better than playing well in a limited role. And so we're back to square one of this isn't accelerating any timeline. This is just saying, like, you're going to play earlier, and then your junior season is going to be the tape that defines your NFL prospects anyway. It is a circular, like, there is no, to me, like, there's really, unless he goes to Duke and plays for Manny Diaz, which he is a guy that can play at any Power 5 school, King Mac. This doesn't make any sense to me. And maybe I'm inflating the notion of how important it is to know the defense, and he's just an athlete and can go out and play, and maybe that's incorrect. Maybe. But I have seen very few instances of positions that need to know, like, can't just go out and play on instinct. They don't translate great. West Virginia last year brought in a whole new secondary. They were decent by the end of the year, but they were bad against Penn State. So, like, there's just evidence that this moving on as a safety is not going to get you what you want your sophomore year. 1 whole year into college football. This is the second year. Like, that's what I mean when it's peak transfer portal. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
When you're 20 years old, sometimes you don't understand those subtleties. This kind of reeks of that, T. Frank. All right. Want to move on to the topic we were going to talk about?
Sure. Yeah.
Let's do it. By the way, you mentioned BlueWhiteIllustrated.com that you could join up for $1. Talk about a great $1 investment. There's so much good stuff there. I know I've talked about it before, T. Frank, but you and your cohorts, there was just so much information that comes out of it. You got to do it. I'm telling you, to all of our Keystone Sports Network listeners, greatest investment you could make. Now, I read all of T. Frank's stuff, love all of it, and typically I find some article that sparks the idea for our show. And that's my segue into our topic for today. You wrote, and you split it up into multiple articles, but it was a lot of fun, T. Frank. You talked about players with their upside, and you called it attainable upside.
Yeah.
Now, you gave a list for both the offense and the defense, a top 10. And please explain, because people are still going to ask us, how could Nick Singleton not be on this list? So please explain how you came up with your list for both the offense and defense.
So initially I did this article, I think last year, of, secret superstars, guys that have superstar potential. And it just ended up being a lot of guys that are freshmen and sophomores, and, Nick Singleton and Denida Sutton and Drew Aller were on the list because they were the freshman or sophomore. I don't necessarily remember, but all of these guys that had great potential, but were so far away from realizing it that we could fill in the gaps of what they were with what we wanted. So I tried to be a little more specific this year. If it's not just talent threshold, because if you look at that, like the offensive line, it would just all have been Penn State's offensive linemen. There's a lot of guys with extreme talent there, but what's the realistic opportunity for that talent to turn into production? So it's not just how big is the gap between where they are and where they can be, but how attainable is that gap? How close can they get this particular year? So yeah, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen have already raised the floor of their expected performance to a level where we don't expect them to take a massive jump. Now, production is different than their talent and ability. So that's where this gets a little bit fuzzy, because some people don't accept or understand the difference between production is also a product of circumstance, as opposed to, am I good at my position and do I have the physical talent to be the best at my position? So that's what we're looking at in this article. Very nerdy specific thing that I would do.
It may be nerdy, but it's also a lot of fun. These are the kind of players that when you're sitting down with your Penn State fan buddies, these are the conversations you have. The young guys, the newer guys, the guys who haven't reached their peak yet. Let's get into the list already. Let's start with the offense. Let's start with number 10 on the offense, which is Quentin Martin.
Yeah.
Showed quite a bit in the spring game, T. Frank.
Yeah, and that's kind of why he's here. I wouldn't have put him on the list before spring football because of how raw he is as a football player, but he showed natural instincts. And I know it's the blue-white game, and I know it's against the blue defense, and it's not necessarily against a Big Ten opposition, but I think that the point here is it's easier to play running back. Going to the conversation about King Mack and safeties, it's easier to play running back, which is you can out-athlete at that position. And he's 194 pounds. He's got tons of room to grow. He could be 200, 202 pounds. Maybe by the beginning of the season, he still has an off season to work. And then I think his instincts and his ability to catch the football and all those things could get him to a point where he's a role player, where before I didn't necessarily see that. Here, I do think that he could be a part of the offense. Now, that's why he's number 10, because I don't think it's going to be a massive jump, but it's as notable of a jump for a guy who's going to be the maybe running back 3 on a team that then sets him up for a sophomore year, where then we see that big jump from him.
And we've seen that running back 3 get reps, even though you have the Singleton and Katron Allen in front of you. RB3 does get some carries. We've seen that the last couple of years. And I keep saying it, and I don't mean to jinx anybody, but running backs are very vulnerable to injury. Even if it's a little tweak, an ankle gets twisted, out a game or two.
You're in a blowout and you need to absorb some carries to somebody else. That's a great place to put them.
Exactly. All right, T. Frank, we got through exactly one of these in quarter number 1. We'll get to a lot more players when we come back in quarter number 2. Hello and welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. I'm Jim Galante. He is T. Frank Carr. T. Frank, we're talking about the list you made, a couple articles you put out in Blue White Illustrated. You called it attainable upside. You have a list of 10 offensive players, 10 defensive players. I was not a math major, but I think that's a total of 20 different players. And so far in quarter number 1, we talked about one of them. We need to pick up the pace, I think, T. Frank.
Right.
Or it'll take us 2 months to get through the list. So let's get right back to it. We were talking about the offense. We started at number 10, which was Quentin Martin. Number 9, you have wide receiver Omari Evans. I'm really glad you put him in there because I think Omari Evans gets so forgotten on this team. I know I did.
Yeah, so he's here because he is so fast and because Penn State has been dedicated to getting him on the football field since he was a freshman. So I struggle with Omari's translation to the field because it has been so helter-skelter, where he's put out there, they burn his red shirt, he's kind of got a specific role in 2022. 2023 rolls around, and basically he vanishes. And now he's in line to be the starting X receiver, and I don't know what to expect from him other than I know Penn State is very invested in his athleticism and needs it on the football field. And that's really what it is. He's 6 feet tall and can run sub 4.4, and everything else outside of that has to fall into place. And that's where I'm almost talking myself out of having him on the list, but he's just the athleticism there is too much to ignore, which I think is evident by how he's been used so far in his career.
But I also got to think when you have such an outstanding trait, speed at a wide receiver,
Yeah.
you've got to somehow make use of that trait. It's too good a trait, too important, especially at that wide receiver position.
Yeah.
Let's get to number 8, which is Drew Shelton, the presumptive starting left tackle.
Yeah.
He was out. He had, I guess, minor surgery after the season, missed all of spring, but we think he'll be the starting left tackle, T. Frank.
So he is a guy who's been transitioning from high school to Penn State for a couple of years now. And that surgery, the whatever injury precipitated that surgery, has really muddied the water on what he is as far as like where he is in his development curve. But from a purely traits perspective, he's not an overwhelming tackle, but he's very fluid as an athlete. And I think what we missed last year when he played because of whatever happened was he can be a devastating run blocker. 6'5", excellent bend and leverage. He's got good feet for a tackle, 33-inch arms. So he's got the baseline of the position. And because of everything that's happened, there has been this, again, a big delta in what he's produced and what he's capable of. Now, he's not Olufashinu, but he can be a quality starting tackle in the Big Ten. And so far, he has underperformed for that. Outside of a freshman season that we give him the grace of he's not supposed to be out there, and the team didn't implode. A lot of that was scheming around him, but they didn't implode, and you can thank Sean Clifford and the way they called the games that year. But he has to, if there's one player on this list that has to, there's a couple, and he is number 1 on the list of has to take a step for Penn State's offense to be competent in 2024. I keep wanting to say 23. We did that already.
It's May. You gotta turn the calendar, T. Frank. And that left tackle position is so important. We got so used to Olu being there. I think we started taking it for granted. Next man up, very interesting player, talked about so much, and he's just a monster of a young man, and that is Cooper Cousins.
Yeah, talent. So talking about the opposite of Drew Shelton is Cooper Cousins is 6'6". He's come into Penn State 320 pounds, and what needs to happen for him is for him to understand the technical and the scheme side of things to really understand what he's up against, and then he can play with confidence. So, there are going to be times he gets whipped by guys who have better technique and are older and stronger. He's 18 years old. So where is he on this development curve by the, let's say, mid-October? James Franklin always talks about those first 5 games, and then players that have been here since January, do they take that step after those first 5 games where they have their sea legs underneath them and then they start to make plays? And that's the back half of this we're looking at with Cooper Cousins, of where is his development by the end of the season, and is he to what level of starter or what level of backup is he in terms of quality is going to determine, I think, a lot of the trajectory for him this season. I don't expect it to be great early on outside of the non-conference games. So seeing how he develops over the course of, especially during the regular season when he's getting live ammo reps, I think that's going to determine where he lands on his upside this year. But he's shown it's attainable for him to be a part of the 2 deep for a freshman. That's wild.
And it seems obvious when you see that and how they played him in the blue-white game that the coaching staff has confidence in him. Yeah. They put him out with that first group on the white team at guard, moved him to center pretty quickly. He got reps. You could see there's confidence there from the coaching staff. All right, number 6, this is a player I really like. Maybe it's just I like the guys at the tight end position because they just seem to hit one after another, T. Frank, and that's Andrew Rappelier.
He's not the overwhelming athlete that maybe some of the other guys have been at the position. Like, he's not 6'6" and running a 4.57 or whatever it was that Theo Johnson ran at the NFL Combine. So the gargantuan, oversized traits aren't necessarily there, but he's a guy that's a B+ at everything. And if he delivers on his run blocking potential, That's a difference-making trait that Penn State's offense struggled with and needed since Brenton Strange left the building. So, again, where is he on that development? We saw a little bit of, we didn't see a lot of him last year, and when we did, it was at the end of games against inferior competition. In the blue-white game, he got a chance to play a little more of an extended role, and saw a couple of the warts. Some of the things he didn't necessarily do great. Using physicality at contact when pulling. He's a physical football player. He flies out into blocks, but sometimes, things got up on him. His awareness of where things weren't great at times. And then you look at what he did in the passing game, and there were some miscommunications. So he needs to iron out the mental things. But that's the thing, is he's 6'4", 250 pounds. He has reached the physical threshold where he needs to be to compete. So again, this is a lot of young player mental development to unlock those traits. And a lot of this too is just confidence, where if you know what you're doing, you hesitate less and you play faster. And I know that sounds so basic, but think about anybody in life. They start to do things, they start to embellish, they start to be able to add layers of complexity to anything they're doing once they're confident in what they're doing. And Andrew Rappleyea, I think, is the prime example of that on the beginning of our list, of a guy who could take a big step forward if all those things fall into place.
How does his skill set complement the guys we assume are 1 and 2, Tyler Warren and Khalil Dinkins?
So I think he's going to be my presumption has been he's going to be the backup Y tight end to Tyler Warren. So he's going to be in line to be the featured tight end, in air quotes, on this list. Although Andy Kotelnicki can feature the H-back, the Y doesn't matter. He can do a lot of different things. Khalil Dinkins would be, in my estimation, competing with Rappleyea for that H-back position, the move tight end in the slot in the backfield, offset from the offensive line. Rappleyea can do either of those things, so I'm curious to see what that second tight end competition looks like, if there is a competition, or if he's going to be the primary backup to both, allowing him to see the field as a third tight end with more reps, but in a different situation, which then goes into, so my curiosities are, is he doing both positions, or are they trying to laser focus him on one so that he can develop and then contribute really well in that area? So some unknowns. We'll have to learn as much as we can about it in training camp, and then see the first week of the season what the actual plan has been this time.
All right, let's turn the page to the top 5. Number 5 on the offensive side, you have Vega Ioane. I mentioned Cooper Cousins being big. Ioane is really big, guy.
So kind of like Amari Evans, and this is not correct, that one defining trait can give you an advantage in football. And being 340 pounds at 6'4", being a human brick wall is certainly helpful as an offensive line. But again, we saw him be out there and be strong and be the size he is now last year after a year in the weight program, and he didn't deliver devastating blocks of any kind. He was good, but he was very much doing his job in segments, right? So he's got to get to his block, and then he's got to secure his block, and then he's got to turn his hips, or he's got to have his hands inside. And there's all of those things that you're thinking about doing instead of doing those things naturally so that you can then run a dude over. And we might get more run a dude over from Vega Ioane this year with the confidence. I saw him looking for work in pass protection, where nobody's coming at him, so he's turning left and right and looking for somebody to hit and put his elbow in the ribs of a pass rusher. I saw him doing that. So there's a second level of awareness here with Vega Ioane, which I think should be a major positive that might show a little more athleticism off from him this year in this offense that likes to get out and run. So you need power and you need athleticism in this offense, and I think he can provide a little bit of both. Although I still don't know, generally, is he athletic for his size, or is he athletic? And those two things can be different. I'm interested to see that this year from Venga, and where his ultimate, what he is at the end, kind of leaves him as a pass blocker and as a run blocker.
You had tied with Vega Ioane at number 5 on the offensive side, J.B. Nelson.
So this is an area where you look at J.B. Nelson and you say he's kind of an offensive lineman that he's not big and tall, he's not big and powerful and wide, but when you look at some of the things he can do, We talked about Drew Shelton earlier. JB Nelson, coming to Penn State from Lackawanna, had similar testing numbers to Penn State's tackles. He has similar length to Penn State's tackles. There's a reason he's the swing guy from guard to tackle. Ultimately, his best play is at guard, but he can do either of those things. The problem is the injuries have prevented him from developing physically and mentally, and where have they left him as a player overall? So Penn State hasn't really been able to separate these two, so I left them both at number 5.
So you weren't able to separate them either. All right, T. Frank, that's going to be it for quarter number 2. We're going to pick up this list as soon as we come back in quarter number 3. Hello and welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. He is T. Frank Carr. I'm Jim Galante. It is quarter number 3. And guess what? We're not going to do Ask T. Frank today. I'm sorry. I know that's the expectation. We'll get back to it next week. We've got our list of 20 players that we're going through, so we don't have time for it this week. But please send in your questions. Just download our app, Keystone Sports. You'll see the Ask T. Frank button. Send in your questions. I promise next week we'll get back to it. All right, T. Frank, we were on the offensive side looking at your list of players with the highest attainable upside.
Yeah.
We are ready for our top 3 on the offensive side. And number 3, you have Trey Wallace. That is interesting in that, like, some of the other players, like we mentioned, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, aren't on this list because they've already pretty much fulfilled that upside. We know where they're going. They're already there. But Trey Wallace is a veteran who still makes this list, though, T. Frank.
Yeah, and I was glad that I was able to find a couple guys like that, so it wasn't just here are all the good young players and then ranking them in order, because that's not as much fun as the nuance of this. Again, super nerd stuff. Trey Wallace, to me, when I'm watching the receivers and what they need this year, speed. This is the thing. Is like speed is paramount. Speed is the most important thing. The Kansas City Chiefs traded up for a guy that can run 4.21 because they want to run past these umbrella coverages in the NFL. Some teams are developing offensive lines and running the football to drop a safety. Other teams just want to run by safeties. And so running by a safety and having that ability, that's really important. But in college football, you're allowed to tackle receivers in the route. Like, it's very physical. The Big Ten, the officiating, like, it is not a hands-off league. So Penn State can have all the speed they want. They can have their Amari Evanses, and they can have their Tyler Johnsons and Carmelo Taylor, who left the program. But these guys that are smaller, slighter, but with extreme speed, and it doesn't matter because they can't separate in a route. Trey Wallace is 200 pounds. He's 6'1", I want to say. He's built physically like you want, and he runs with an athleticism that isn't just about speed. He's fast enough. He's fast. He's not the fastest, but he presents the opportunity to get the hell away from a defensive back, to not just break a tackle after the catch, but present a quality target to the quarterback, which has been the biggest problem in this offense, is that you can latch onto these receivers and they will not fight through contact to rip open and get open. And that's why, I think Julian Fleming, what he's going to provide this year is just get the hell open. And maybe he's not going to create explosive plays, but again, Trey Wallace has the ability to do both. Be explosive. He is one of the best leapers on the team where he can get up and go vertical, but we haven't seen it because he's been injured and he's been inconsistent. So he's got the biggest, he's going to be the top target in the offense at this point by process of elimination. So he has the opportunity to put up the yards. He has the talent and he has the diversity in his skill set that he could be a number one receiver like we haven't seen since Jahan Dotson, that you can put into any situation and get yards out of. And Penn State has desperately needed that guy.
And he could be looked at as the biggest variable in the receiving game. He's the guy who could help Drew Aller the most. Earlier,
when I was talking about Drew Shelton, the other guy that has to hit this year, that has to reach some level of their upside, is Trey Wallace. He can't spend this season on the injury table. He can't be in the trainer's room for Penn State to be successful. There's not enough bodies with the composite talent in order to do that this year for Penn State to be good, to be really good. They could get by, maybe, but they can't be what everyone wants them to be without Trey Wallace being the number one underpinning this group.
You talked earlier about Penn State losing the depth at wide receiver. That's fine if at the top the quality remains healthy. I'm looking at you, Julian Fleming and Trey Wallace. All right, let's get to number 2 on your list on the offense, and that's Anthony Donka. He showed up last year for the Peach Bowl. We were surprised. He ended up getting a lot of reps as the right tackle, and he showed pretty well for himself, T.
Yeah.
Frank.
Yeah, he's a guy. There's a wide variable of where he could be. We've seen 95 snaps from him, and 46 of those were in the Peach Bowl against a team that their best pass rusher, who was okay, opted out of the game. I'm not trying to take anything away from Anthony Donko. I'm saying that I just don't have enough evidence to guarantee this. But when you look at his upside as a guy, we mentioned earlier how J.B. Nelson and Drew Shelton are kind of similar in their body type and their abilities. Donko is 6'5", 328 pounds. He's built in a lab to play tackle with 35-inch arms and has some better testing numbers in certain areas than those other guys. So again, not Olu Fashanu, even though our buddy Landon Tengwall kind of hinted at that, of a guy who has unbelievable traits and seems to be putting it all together pretty early, and the history and the timeline kind of match up. The confidence in him surrounding him is why he's number 2. That where I'm uncomfortable, because I don't have that practice information, I don't have that inside that the coaches do. The sentiment around him is so confident that he's going to battle for the starting position, get the starting position, and be a quality player, that I put him at number 2 on this list, because the traits there they were always there. And again, I'm not trying to always revisit this, but it is just so mind-blowing to me that this is a guy, when I watched him play offensive line in high school, I didn't think he could get it. Like, I didn't think he got football. He was watching more than he was playing. And in the span of a year and a half, he turned himself into the best offensive lineman in a class that had 2 5-star players by some services. It's astounding, the job that he's done and that Phil Troutwine has done with him. And that it speaks to that he's here, and neither of those other guys are on this list, and he's number 2. That is a testament to how much work he's put in over the last 3.5 years, or however long it's been for Donko.
And it's also a reminder of where a player is does not always determine where he's going to be. There are a lot of variables and factors that work into it.
Yeah.
Okay, T. Frank, let's get to number 1 on the offensive side, and I love this. It's Drew Aller, and your first line is, let's all take a 4-count deep breath.
Let's do some box breathing.
Drew Aller.
Yeah, we're going to do a little bit of yoga here, Jim. 4 in, hold for 4, lower the blood pressure, and let it out. We're not here to argue. We're not here to talk about Bo Prabula and who should be the starter. We're talking about attainable upside and talent. And Drew Aller is the most talented player at the most important position on the roster that Penn State's had in quite some time. And that is factually undeniable. You know, from 5-star in recruiting services to the way Penn State has treated him and developed him and played him as a freshman and gotten him as much reps and starting experience as possible. But really, he's number 1 here because he is also a litmus test of the rest of the list. He cannot be, and I think this is also part of his particular set of skills, he cannot be number 1 in development if Drew Shelton doesn't take a step, if Anthony Donko doesn't take a step, if Trey Wallace isn't a number 1 receiver. Quarterback is so interdependent on those other positions, and certain guys can eliminate mistakes and eliminate variables. Drew has the ability, theoretically, to be that guy. From the evidence, we have not seen him able to overcome pressure or pressure in his face to not just avoid negative plays, but create positive ones. You know, scramble, keep his eyes downfield, be accurate with the pass to a player. We haven't seen him consistently do that. But he has the talent. When he's throwing in rhythm, he is very accurate, and he gets the ball out quickly. Mentally, he understands the game. And that is, I want fans to understand how hard that is, how rare that is. And it's one of the reasons why Sean Clifford, the team kept buying into him as the starter because he understood the game, and eventually that got him a Rose Bowl win. Drew Aller has similar mental abilities where he sees the coverage, and when you're watching the All-22 view and you see the coverage as it forms and he's seeing it in real time, you see his eyes go to the right spot, and then he throws the ball and something bad happens. To me, like, I'm watching the process of, okay, they were showing a too-high defense. They rotate to a cover 3. He goes off his first route, which is not open because of the coverage. So then he comes back to the backside dig to the number 2 or number 3 in his progression, throws the ball. Maybe it's a tick early because he got through his first progression so quickly, or maybe the receiver didn't catch the ball. But when I watch him scan the field and get to his progression, when I'm watching quarterbacks and scouting Penn State's opponents, so very few of them can do that. Like, almost none. And so then when you go up against a Talia Tagovailoa, or you see one of these quarterbacks in the Big Ten that isn't that, but maybe has some other flaws, you go, okay, this can be a game. Drew Aller can give any team on the schedule a game. But it comes down to the biggest wild card that I can't predict, and you can't predict. We can all think and have our opinions on what we think is going to happen, but can he play above water? Can he keep whatever it is that is in quarterbacks where they don't process correctly, coolly, and confidently to deliver the ball on time and accurately while people are trying to rip their head off? If he can master that side of his game, unlocking all of this takes them to a stratosphere that Penn State fans have been hoping for. I'm not trying to give you false hope, but these are the facts and why I stand by Drew Aller can still be the quarterback you want him to be. Now, can be and will be are two different things.
All of those skill sets that we thought he had and we saw glimpses of coming in, those skill sets are still there. My, as a lay person watching him, T. Frank, I just narrow it down to, it seems like there's a lack of confidence sometimes, not just in his own skills, but in the skills of his wide receivers. He may not say that, but I think it's just a lack of confidence.
Yeah, so that is a really good point that he's brought up. And this is something I talked about after the Peach Bowl. I wrote about this, and people were pretty upset about it, that he needed to rebuild his confidence. This offseason, he talked about playing with more confidence, more swagger, let his competitiveness come out, because that is the key to unlocking all of this, is not being afraid to make mistakes. So you've got to hope that Andy Kotelnicki and his personality, his general tone setting, coach vibes are those that are going to allow Drew to feel like he can make mistakes, play free, and create some special. Because there are the players around him to create that special if they all work together.
All right, T. Frank, that's it for quarter number 3. Quarter 4, we're going to go through our list of defensive players. Stay tuned for that. Hello and welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. He's T. Frank. I'm Jim. We're talking about Penn State football. T. Frank put together 2 different lists of players on the offensive side and defensive side with the largest attainable upside.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time on the offense. Let's get to the defense, T. Frank, so we could get through the whole list. Your number 10 is Antoine Belgrave Shorter, a true first-year player, and he's on your list.
Yeah, this is an interesting list. The defense, and this speaks to the difference between the two sides and why everyone is wringing their hands about the offense, because there is the talent there. There is the upside. There are fewer players that you feel confident have attained it already and are predicted to be good. I couldn't put Kobe King, Denai Dennis Sutton, Amin Vanover, or a single defensive tackle on this list because I know what they are. They're proven commodities that bring you a certain floor of good play. You've got a couple superstars mixed in there. So this list, the offensive list had to be 10. This one could have been maybe 5, maybe. Antoine Belgrave Shorter makes the list because he is a freshman that has, again, exhibited confidence while playing a position where if you're confident and aggressive and you have the physical skills, you can play early. It's not ideal, You would like to have guys that are veteran and you trust and you have some banked knowledge of. But at 6 foot, 194 pounds, if he's playing with confidence, he's not really lacking anything other than proving that he can do it. You saw a little bit of that inexperience against Trey Wallace, where he got beat a couple times. He got a pass interference call, but was fighting with Penn State's number one receiver in the blue-white game, was going toe-to-toe with him, and didn't look overwhelmed, didn't look overmatched. And that, I think, says something about him as a football player.
All right, let's get to number 9, which is Kavion Keys. He's part of that next generation of linebacker. We got to start seeing those guys step up, Frank.
And these bottom two, I don't think play a big role in this fall because of the depth and talent at positions, or because, the way the defense is changing. Kavion Keys is 6'3". He's got the talent. He's nearly 230 pounds. He might be 6'2", actually. But he's got, my point is, he's got a great frame. He needs to understand the game a little bit better, but he's put the work in physically that the mental side needs to show up, and then he can start to make plays.
All right, next up at number 8, another defensive back, Dakari Nelson.
Would have been King Mac. Would have been King Mac as a guy who could be a splash player, a special role player, somebody who could come in and have the ball skills and instincts. Dakari Nelson has more has more tangible upside at 6'3", 223 pounds, who also runs fast. There's just more he's got to prove, from his ball skills to his coverage instincts and understanding. There was less that he did in high school that made you feel like this guy's got special skills other than the physical side. In just terms of, I talked to him, I interviewed him. He's like, yeah, I don't really watch film. I'm waiting to get to college to do that. So, there are things about his game that need to be proven over time, but the talent is why he makes this list at number 8 from a physical perspective. And I think he's done a good job. Watching him in the blue-white game, I thought he looked like he had bought in and done the things necessary to be on this list. He has earned that spot.
Next up, another linebacker, Tamir Robinson, who we know he came off an injury late in his high school career.
This is a guy who, when you look at him, you think he could be 245 pounds, 6'3", just a gargantuan frame. I know some fans wanted him at edge rusher. I think the way he played in the blue-white game, he was able to stay with Andrew Rappleyea down the seam. He looked confident in run defense. Maybe I didn't see him flash as much as an explosive downhill guy, but he's a true Mike linebacker for the modern era, where he's got a massive frame, giant wingspan to get into passing lanes to disrupt RPOs, where he can be a little bit out of position, but if he is able to redirect, he can get into passing lanes and also play the run well. The run part and some of those other instincts, and he looked like he had more translation to the field skills from a mental perspective of putting his talent on display in the blue-white game that we saw from Keys. And that's really why he's at number 7. And that plus, he played safety and defensive end in high school, and most guys don't do that.
So there is a set of skills there. All right. At number 6 is Cam Miller, a guy who did see some time last year, especially in the bowl game, but he's going to be one of your top cornerbacks.
This is where the list really picks up. We could have started the list at 6 here, because Cam Miller, where he fits into this top 5, I actually had to move him out because of some other players that I think have marginally more talent because of the size factor. 6 foot 183. He looks a little thin as a corner. I think he competes well. He isn't shy from contact, although that missed tackle on Lennon Montgomery, I can't get it out of my head. But I don't think he's a bad corner from that perspective. And he's a hyper athlete that can stay with anybody in coverage. But at the catch point, we saw Trey Harris of Ole Miss was able to jump over his head. Some absolute dimes from Jackson Dart to make that happen. Miller was in position, but I think it just speaks to, he needs to learn a new level of physicality and a new level of aggression at the catch point. And his size and his strength are an area where I'm interested to see how that plays into that. At 183, he's not far off. It's just, again, when we get to the top 5 of this list, there are guys who have a lot of those composite skill sets you're looking for that aren't just one-dimensional. Where Cam Miller might be a better athlete than some of the guys that are ahead of him, I don't know that I've seen him be well-rounded yet. And so I would like to see that from him, but I still think he's going to be a starter, and I still think he's going to be very good.
All right. At number 5, you have Zaki Wheatley. I got to just mention the first line in your conversation here was while Sean Fitz has been more in the camp of KJ Winston, you've been a big Zaki Wheatley fan.
Yeah.
I got to admit, I'm on Sean Fitz's side. I've been a huge KJ Winston guy from the start.
This is not a left Twix, right Twix situation where you have to pick a side. I also think KJ Winston is phenomenal and is a superstar. They pair so well together. And I've always been intrigued by Wheatley's combination of athleticism and pure coverage skills. The ball hawks thing that everyone loves, where we've seen Winston make a lot of plays. And I'm not saying he's not a ball hawk, but there's a certain Tig Brownness to this of a guy who just gets to the football that Wheatley brings. Plus he's 6'2". He's not so much smaller than KJ Winston that you would say he can only play in deep coverage. Now, he's not as physical by a mile. He's not as physical as KJ Winston. This is, again, not to compare the two, but Wheatley has those playmaking skills, the center field ability, sideline to sideline speed to intercept passes, especially in a defense that's going to try and confuse the quarterback and bait you into throwing into those windows. And if Wheatley has solved his issues of being over aggressive and leaving his zone coverage and potentially leading to big plays and touchdowns, if he's learned how to manage his instincts, this is a guy who could maybe not be as good as Winston, but have better statistics from turnovers and all those things and game impacting plays.
All right, let's go to number 4, A.J. Harris. A lot of us fell in love with the stars system, the 5-star coming out of high school. Mm-hmm. We all wanted to settle down a little bit. Then we all got excited again watching him in the blue-white game too, Frank.
Yeah, because it's an unknown. You watch what he did in high school, you watch what he did at Georgia, and there's, again, limited snaps in a different situation. But you saw him be in press man coverage, play physical with the team's number 1 receiving group, and didn't look out of place. The physicality and the size, 6'1", 188, he's not slow. He's faster than I expected. I think he got into Penn State's program. He's a year older. So when we're talking again about speed, at a certain point you have enough. And then it becomes those incremental diminishing returns of a guy who runs in the 4.4s, I think is fast enough to play football. But are your other composite skills going to make up the difference against a guy who runs a 4.3? And the way he chucks people and his aggressiveness, I think that's where, to me, it's a differentiating factor. He's getting in guys' grills. And again, in college football, you can do that. And, within the first 5-10 yards, I think he can disrupt routes and do the things that are done to Penn State from that perspective. And that's why, again, I had Miller at 4 and A.J. Harris at 6. And then I learned he's much faster than I expected. So that composite skill set, the evidence-based of committed to Georgia, high 4-star, he became number 4 on the list.
All right, number 3 is defensive end Jamel Lyons. We heard his name a lot from the coaches. Our buddy Landon Tengwall absolutely loves him. Is he next in line as the next big-time defensive end, T. Frank?
Where does he fit in the rotation? He should be number 1 on this list from talent and the delta to where he could be, given what we've seen of his physical skills on the field during the blue-white game, the way he used his hands. I just can't put him at number 2 or number 1 because there are guys that I think, from a talent perspective, might be a smidge better and are just older. So there's a little more evidence there. But yeah, complete package at defensive end. There's not a whole, when you get to these really good football players, there's no real thing to say because it's like, he's fast enough, he's big enough, he uses his hands well, he could be the next guy, but does he see the field because they've got the guy that was the next guy still playing?
And again, this is nice where the Penn State has that rotation on defense where hopefully he'll get some reps. Number 2, Abdul Carter. You got to put him in when he makes that move to defensive end from linebacker.
I've already been yelled at because I didn't have Denai Dennis Sutton on the list. And if I didn't have Abdul Carter on the list, I think that I might have been there might have been a notice. Somebody might sue me. Carter, I think of this list, he's here purely from the physical ability perspective because he's got a lot of work to do with his hands. But the minute he figures it out, he is the next iteration of Chop Robinson with more size in length perspective. So that's why he's number 2. We know he is physically strong. We know he's explosive. But can he translate those skills to the position where he was very raw in the blue-white game? He's, again, just like Cooper Cousins, he's got 4 months to figure it out. So by mid-October, they are on a championship drive. Although I'm doing that math, and I don't know if that makes sense anymore because the schedule has changed. It's not, you don't have cupcakes until October anymore.
And you know what? He's got first round money as an incentive.
Yep.
T. Frank. All right, number 1 on the list, linebacker Tony Rojas.
Yeah, I did this because I just love Tony Rojas's game, man. The beauty of this is that we have not seen him do it as much as we saw Abdul Carter his freshman year. So again, I can paint in all of the things that I want, but I saw a guy that has better zone instincts, better coverage instincts, and explosive downhill in the run game in a way that seemed more about reading and reacting as opposed to he's just unbelievably talented. And Abdul was a little raw and kind of just flying around making plays. I see more cerebral side from Tony, which means I think he could be a better linebacker, pure linebacker, than Carter was at Penn State, which is just why he's number 1. It's amazing.
Okay, very good, T. Frank. And we made it through the list. Great job. That is it, though, for our show. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you join us next time on the Keystone Kickoff Show.